All right. If you have a Bible dictionary, you'll need that. If you have a concordance, go ahead and have that open. If you use an electronic one, use that. If you have a concordance, go ahead and have that open on your mobile device if you're using one. And a Bible dictionary, and turn to page 1294. So, concordance, Bible dictionary, and if you have your Bible, turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. A lot of different things you need. All right. Okay. What page? It's, let's see. Look again. 1294. Yeah, 1294. And the Bible dictionary. 1 Thessalonians 3. And the Bible. And if you have a concordance, we'll need it in a minute. All right. Everybody ready? In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, let's start right there. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, Paul is writing to the church at Thessalonica, and we read in verse 5, right? If you kind of go back to verse 4, for verily when we were with you, when Paul was with the church at Thessalonica, we could go to, I think Acts 17 talks about his ministry there, and how everything happened and everything that occurred and the church was established. Maybe Acts 20. He says, for verily when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and you know. There was persecution, difficulty there in Thessalonica. A church was established. Verse 5, for this cause, when I could no longer forbear, Paul's separated from them, can't get back to them, but he wants to know what's going on. In fact, if you look at verse 5 of 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, he says, lest I sent to know your faith. He wants to know the condition of the church. He wants to know the condition of the spiritual condition of the people there. And his concern is, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you. All right? He is concerned that that if we go with the idea of the tempter there being Satan, that somehow the Satan has tempted them, and he is concerned for their spiritual health and for their spiritual condition. And you notice what he says, though, he is worried about this, and the reason he's worried about this is because if they've been tempted and this has happened, then their labor would be what? In vain. All right? Their labor would be in vain. Now that, when I read that passage, it brought up a lot of thoughts, and I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at this. First, from a church member's perspective, I don't know if y'all have ever considered this, but the way a church is measured as determining if what they are doing is in vain is the spiritual condition of the people. It's not the number of the people. It's not the size of the church. It's the spiritual condition of the people. If in this particular case, all the work Paul would have done in Thessalonica, he feels would have been in vain if by some means the tempter have tempted them and they had fallen somehow, then his work would have been in vain. So the determining factor of a church is the spiritual condition of the people. So you either determine if Victory Baptist Church has been in vain, or you are the one who proves that it hasn't been in vain. That comes down to the individual. That places a lot of responsibility. That changes the way a member of a church should perceive themselves. Because it's not like, well, I can just do whatever I want. Well, you can, but then that determines that the whole purpose of the church was a waste of time. Does that make sense? That is his concern, is, hey, this whole thing could have been in vain. This whole thing could have been meaningless. This whole thing could have served absolutely no purpose. So when I started thinking about that, I'm like, well, that says a lot about how pastors should perceive the church, how church members should perceive the church. It raises lots of questions. But then I started thinking, I wonder what if we went from just Matthew to Revelation, what could we learn as far as developing a theology on that which is vain? All right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to work on this word vain, and we're going to see how it's used in the New Testament and see what we can learn about it. But I thought we would start in the dictionary. If you look up vain in the dictionary, it's going to tell you to see vanity. And and the dictionary that we have in the pews, if you look on page 1294, you will see an entry for vanity. Everybody see it? All right, and we read these words. Vanity, emptiness, next word, worthlessness or futility. So, for something to be vain, what do we mean by that? Empty, worthlessness, or futility. Now go back to 1 Thessalonians. So what is he saying? That their labor, all the work that they did in Thessalonica, would have turned out to be empty, worthless, or what? Futile, right? Another way, what would be another way to summarize that? A waste of time. Meaningless, useless, right? Now, again, what's going to determine in Thessalonica is not how many people are there, not how big it is, but the spiritual condition of the people, right? Sometimes that's the way people measure the success. Hey, we've got 3,000 people, we're great. Okay, well, what does that mean? 3,000 people what? Right? Determines is the spiritual state, the spiritual condition. Does that make sense? Paul doesn't go, hey, there's a church in Thessalonica and there's this many people, so hey, then we're good. No, he wants to know, what's the situation? Because he's concerned that the tempter had tempted them and that something had happened to them spiritually. And if their spiritual situation is not good, then the labor is in vain. So this raises lots of interesting questions. Let's continue with the entry here. The word occurs how many times in the Old Testament? 37. Most frequently in what book? Ecclesiastes. The word vanity, as used in the Bible, does not mean conceit or a superiority complex, like the modern meaning of the term, right? Okay, that's how people would use it in "You're so vain." Okay, quote the lyric of a famous song. Okay, you probably think the song is about you. I can start singing all the lyrics. Okay, everybody knows the song. Okay, all right, yeah. Okay, so that's not how we understand it. Okay, the biblical usage is speaking of something that is empty, something that is worthless, something that is futile. All right, everybody make sure we understand that. When applied to persons, it means emptiness or futility of natural human life, and it talks about it in Job, Ecclesiastes, etc., etc. Now that's the Old Testament usage. Now, I wish they would have given us the number for New Testament usage. I believe, and this is surface, I think it's around 44 times in the New Testament. I could be wrong, but we'll see, because I'm going to count on you guys to tell me that in a minute. Let's continue. When applied to things, vanity is especially used to describe idols. All right. So when it's used to describe persons, what does it tell us about persons? The emptiness or futility of natural human life. All right? Or remember the key phrase in Ecclesiastes? What determines what is vain? Under the sun. Remember that's the key phrase in Ecclesiastes? Everything under the sun is meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. The only time you find meaning is when you look to the one who created the sun. You look above, you look up. You don't look here. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. All right. So, but when it's applied to persons, it speaks of the emptiness of futility of natural human life lived under the sun. When applied to things, it usually refers to idols, because there is no spiritual reality in them. Believers are urged to stay away from. What are we urged to stay away from? Vain things. We're urged to stay away from that, okay? That's important. And to live their lives in the reality of their relationship to Christ. Anything short of God Himself that people trust to meet their deepest needs is vanity. Right? So there's a lot of different ways of using it. Now, that don't tell us how many times it's used in the New Testament, and don't really articulate the New Testament usage, but I want to focus on the New Testament usage because I think in the Old Testament, you're going to see it applying really to the meaningless of life under the sun and to the meaninglessness of idols. That's, I think, is going to be a predominant use in the Old Testament. I could be wrong, but I think that's the case. When we turn to the New Testament, I think we have I think it expands its usage, and then we can get into that. Did anyone look up to see how many times it's used in the New Testament? Okay, just the word vain. Okay, 18? Do I? Okay, I got 35, I got 18, so we... Okay. So I got 16, 18. I got 3 different numbers.
I have 35 in the New Testament.
And what word did you look up? Vain.
And then vanity 3 times.
Vanity 3 times. So we have agreement on vanity. There is more. There's more than. I think there's more than 2. I think there may even be 3.
Maybe different Hebrew words because I have a different.
Comes up 35 times.
35 times. Okay. 16 times. Okay, so we have different Greek words. Okay, good. Okay, that's what I wanted to see. Okay, so this is what we'll do. Look, just pull up all the references to the word vain, and then under each passage, we'll have to determine what Greek word is and if there's a different meaning, because that may give us shades of meaning or layers to getting us a correct understanding of the term. What we're going to do this morning is a modified, simplistic word study method of Bible study, all right? I could teach you the word study method of Bible study, but you know how I feel about teaching methods of Bible study anymore, okay? But we're going to use a modified one and simplify this, okay? What we want to do, here's what we want to do. We want to determine the biblical teaching on what is vain in the New Testament. So we're modifying the word study to New Testament usage, and we have a purpose. I would hope that none of you want to get to the end of your life and look back, and what it basically amounted to was vanity. Worthless, useless, waste of time, futile. I hope nobody wants that. Now, if you are not a Christian and you get to the end of your life and it's all empty, meaningless, and worthless and futile, you may not care. Okay, you may not care. I think you're still going to care. But as a Christian, that's the last thing we want. Because as a Christian, you are a Christian because the eternal Son of God shed His blood to die for you, to save you. And if all you did with the salvation that was given to you is end up in a useless, meaningless, futile life, that's pretty much blasphemous to the gift that you've been given. I will argue that it's blasphemous, even if you haven't experienced salvation. The Creator God gave you a life, and if all you did with that gift is empty, meaningless, futile, it's nothing. I will argue that a large portion of Christians live their life as saved people, and when they get to the end, it's going to be pretty futile and pretty meaningless and pretty empty because they've never even considered what it equals a futile, empty life. Paul was concerned, was he not, for the church at Thessalonica that, hey, he wasted his time there. He wasted his time. Now, church members may get offended when a pastor says, well, I think I wasted my time, but you determine how much, I can put all kinds of effort into something, and then what you do determines if it was what? Was it in vain? Now, you may not want that pressure. You may go, well, that's not fair, but that's kind of the way it works, correct? Right? As a church, we don't want it to be in vain. So let's figure out exactly what the Bible has to say. What's the first use of the word vain in the New Testament? It should be in the Gospel of Matthew, I believe. Matthew chapter 6. All right. Now, we're going to have to look at the context for each one, and we'll go through here, okay? Now, we're going to, I think it's in verse, what was 7, you said? Okay, we're going to back up, because I think this whole passage speaks of vain, vanity, meaningless, and worthlessness of something, okay? Let's start in verse 1. Okay, in verse 1, we are told to do what? Of chapter 6 of Matthew. Take heed. Pay attention. Now, what do we need to pay attention to? We need to take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them. All right? What is it? What is the idea of alms? Giving, good deeds. Would everybody agree that that's pretty fair definition? You have a dictionary in front of you. Look up alms and see what it says. See if there's an entry. Are you using the Bible dictionary or are you using something else? Okay. Are you using concordance? Okay. Page 42, and the Bible dictionary defines an alms as money given out of mercy for the poor. Money given out of mercy for the poor. Everybody see that? Okay. So, take heed that you don't do what? Give money to the poor for what purpose? To be seen by other men, to be recognized, to be seen, for people to do that. And why do you not want to do that? Why do you not want to give money to the poor so that you can be seen, so that you can be recognized, according to the verse? There's no reward in heaven. In other words, you can put next to verse 1, if I give alms, if I give money to help people so that I can be seen, so that I can be recognized, so I can be elevated, then my action, are you ready for it, is vain as far as heavenly reward is concerned. Now, so the word vain is not used here, but the concept is. Everybody see that? That's why when you do a word study, right, I'm kind of teaching you the method. When you do the word study, this is important. This is very important. That's why you need two important tools. What are two tools that are absolutely critical to do a word study? Okay. Well, we'll go with the dictionary. So we'll add 3 tools. Okay, the dictionary is not even on my list, but we'll add 3 tools. So we'll go with a dictionary. Okay, great. 2 other tools. You need a concordance because you got to find out everywhere where the word is used. And then what's the third absolutely critical tool? Nope. That's just assumed. But it is a Bible, but it's a different kind of Bible. Nope. Topical Bible. Why? What's the difference between a topical Bible and a concordance? The concordance is going to show you every place the word is used. Topical Bible is going to show you everywhere the topic is used, brought up, even if it doesn't use the word. Here, the concept is there. You can give money to the poor, right? You can give $1 million to the poor, and if you tell everyone that we gave money to the poor, right? If you have a press release, churches do this all the time. And a lot of times they do good things, but they want someone to know because the press doesn't report on this unless someone tells them, right? So there's been multiple churches lately who paid off everyone's medical debt. Now that's an awesome action, right? But why is it being reported in the news? Someone has to tell the news what happened, right? Okay, so if they tell the news and it's reported according to this passage, well, then what value did that have? It helped the people they paid the medical bill off, and I do nothing but applaud that. That's great, right? One of the churches in Abilene paid off all the school lunch debts for kids. But of course, it got reported in the Abilene Reporter News. Okay, so again, someone let them know that, right? Someone's got to tell the news, hey, this church just did this. So, okay, it may not be, but probably highly. Put it this way: unless someone in the church went and told, but if there's someone in the church went and told, they're actually hurting the church from what? A heavenly reward. Okay, now they're going to gain an earthly reward because a lot of people will see that and be, man, I want to be a part of that church, and that's good for the church. They grow in number, so they look like they're doing great. But from this perspective, that giving of that gift, the paying off of that debt, it becomes what? Meaningless and vain as far as heavenly reward is concerned. What reward do you get? You get the reward that from men. You get the praise of men. All right? That's an important thing. When you help people, you don't need to broadcast it. You don't need to tell everyone, right? And if you help someone sometimes you shouldn't expect then to be praised or to receive recognition here. You should do it for the right reason, right? Because you're showing grace and mercy to help someone, but you don't do it for your personal gain and personal reward, right? So if we're going to write down the definition or we start building a theology of the vain, right? What's the first point we need in our theology? Giving or helping others should not be done for personal recognition or personal gain. If so, my giving is in vain as far as a heavenly reward is concerned. Right? Everybody got that? Verse 2, therefore when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. Same concept. Don't have it announced. They use trumpets. Some churches today use the news media. Right? Get that out there. Or someone tells the news media, okay? Right? And even if the news media has someone who's a member of the church, they shouldn't go and write about it because that's not what the Bible tells you to do, all right? So verse 3, but when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and the Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. All right, so we see how, now the word vain is not there, but everybody see why I'm using it? Because what becomes vain? As far as what is concerned? Heavenly reward. Make sure. The giving is not in vain because it still will help someone, but the heavenly reward, it becomes vain as far as the heavenly reward is concerned. Now, if you don't want a heavenly reward, then that's okay. I guess give all you want and get all the attention you want. I mean, from a pragmatic perspective, it's going to help you. You're going to get a good reputation, and people are going to think you're a great person. And if that's what you want, then go for it. All right, but let's continue. Verse 5. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. Okay, so speaking of this theology of the vain, what's the first thing we need? First thing we learn? Don't give alms to be recognized, or your giving is in vain as far as a heavenly reward is concerned. What is the second thing we see in verse 5? We move from alms to what? Prayer. Don't pray to do what? To be seen of men, because if you do so, what do you gain from it? It's open book. Right. I mean, what does verse 5 say? It's right there. Do I need to read it again? Yeah, right. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. What reward do they have? They do so to be seen of men. That's the exact word in verse 5. Maybe the NIV uses something different, but to be seen. Their reward is they are seen. That's the reward in verse 5. The heavenly part is what? They don't get anything. It's meaningless. It's vain. So we can give in a vain way. We can pray in a vain way. What's the thing that leads to vain giving? Is to do it to be seen. What's the thing that can lead to vain praying? To be seen, to be recognized, to be. And this was an important verse back in the controversial time that Tim Tebow was an NFL quarterback. This became a major point of contention because Christians were all supporting him. But after he would score a touchdown, he would kneel down. They started calling it Tebowing, and offer a prayer of thanks to God. Well, a lot of Christians were like, why do you have to kneel down in the end zone after a touchdown so that the whole world can see you? Can't you just score the touchdown, walk off to the sideline, and then pray? And the answer is, yes, absolutely, right? So if you're doing it there in the end zone, who's getting the attention? He is. And that's what the few Christians who criticized him, they received major backlash because you couldn't do that because he was the Christian hero at the time. You couldn't say anything negative, but I think that's a very biblical concept, right? I mean, you're in a stadium in front of 60,000 people and you're kneeling down to pray. Okay, who's getting the attention? Now, I know what he was trying to do. He was trying to give God the glory, but he was getting the attention. And so all the debate became about him. And who got forgotten in the whole discussion? God. So in that sense, the prayer became about him, and it did not become about God. So in that sense, the prayer became what? Vain as far as what is concerned? Reward in heaven. Does that make sense? All right, verse 6. People are going to get mad at me for that, but that's okay. All right. Verse 6. But I mean, it's a text right there. I mean, like, I don't know why that's sometimes when things happen within Christianity and you literally point out a text that should not be complicated to read, people get mad. Is there anything in that verse that's complicated? Don't pray to do what? To draw attention to yourself. Okay, I've given the example when I was in Airman Leadership School in San Angelo. We went to the dining facility to get some food, and there was an individual, I think he was a young Christian, and then we got ready to eat, and then he stood up, right, slammed his hands down on the table, and then, "Dear Lord," and then just like as loud as he could, prayed for his food. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? What do you want the whole? And I know what his argument was. Well, I'm trying to do it to be a good witness, but you're trying to do it to be seen. Prayer is not about witnessing. You don't pray to be a witness, because that's using prayer, right, as a means to an end. Prayer is you communicating with God. It's not you praying to be seen. If you do that, it becomes vain. It becomes meaningless. Other than, well, I'm being a good witness. That's not the way. It would be like you're out on a date, right? And you want everyone to think that you're really a good boyfriend, right? So you say everything to your girlfriend as you're eating there as loud as you can so that everyone hears, so they think, man, he is really sweet and he says a lot of great things. I wish he was my boyfriend, right? I think the girlfriend would probably go, are you talking to me or are you talking to everyone else trying to show how wonderful you are? And what would be the answer? Well, when we do that in prayer, what are we trying to demonstrate? Now, we're not trying to talk to God. We're trying to show everyone how great we are. You see, that's a problem. That's a problem. So you're not to pray that way because it becomes vain. So far, so good? Right. Now you say, well, where's the word vain? It's coming up, okay? Verse 6, how are we to pray? But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which is in secret shall reward thee openly. What's the means to not having a vain prayer life? Private prayer. Now, is this completely condemn public prayer? It does not, but what it calls into question is your reason for praying, right? If you're at a restaurant and you pray over your meal, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you can answer what honestly. The reason you're doing so is not so that the waitress sees you, not that the people next to you see it, but you truly, out of a heart of thanksgiving, you want to thank God for the food that you are about to partake and ask God to bless it. If you're doing that legitimately, honestly, then by all means do so. Just don't make it a scene. I mean, how long do you need to pray? I mean, I've been with some people at a restaurant, and it's like, how long are you going to pray for this food? By the time you're done praying, I'm going to need to order something else. What's your purpose? Is your purpose just to say, Lord, thank you for the food? It's pretty straightforward, right? Lord, thank you for the food. Bless it to the nourishment of my body. In Jesus' name, amen. You can just be quick and to the point. What's your real point? Sometimes people will do it when all the family gets together at Thanksgiving. Then all of a sudden they got to pray. They haven't prayed for a meal in a year, but now it's Thanksgiving and everyone's there. Why are you praying? Right? It's got to be legitimate. Does that make sense? So it's not a condemnation of public prayer. It's a condemnation of what motivates you. But what's the real secret to a prayer life that's not in vain? Private. Private. Okay. Now that brings us to verse 7. We're gonna get done with all 35, aren't we? Okay. Yeah, we may get done with one. Okay. Verse 7. But this whole section is about, if we're gonna have a theology of vain, we gotta work out through all of this. All right? What's verse 7? But when you pray, use not vain repetitions. There we go. All right. So let's go through these again. Number 1. Right? We're dealing a doctrine or a theology of vain. What's the first thing that we learned about that would lead us to doing something in vain? When we give money to the poor, don't do what? Give it to be seen. Remember, that was number 1. I was in verse 1, right? Don't give to be seen. Why? Yeah, your heavenly reward, it's going to be empty and vain. You're not going to get a heavenly reward. Does that make sense? Okay. What was the second thing we learned? There's the giving to the poor. That's the second thing. Don't pray to be seen. If you pray to be seen, what occurs? Right? Your heavenly reward, your prayer is going to be vain as far as the heavenly reward is going to concern. If you give to be seen, your heavenly reward it's going to be vain for a heavenly reward. If you pray to be seen, your prayer is going to be vain as far as the heavenly reward is concerned. Right? The third thing we saw is if you want a prayer life that is not in vain, what do you need to focus on? Private prayer in the closet, right? You alone with God. So far, so good? All right, then number 4. If you're going, another thing you have to avoid if you don't want a vain prayer life is what? Verse 7. Okay, use not vain repetitions. Vain repetitions. The NIV says useless babblings, right? Okay, do not keep on babbling like pagans, all right? Vain repetitions, all right? Now, I think if you look up the Greek phrase there, I think it gives you the Greek meaning for vain repetitions. It puts the two together, I believe, right? Okay, and it deals with what? What's the definition there for vain repetitions? Probably...
To stammer, to repeat the same things over and over, use many idle words, babble, prate. Some suppose the word derived from Bacchus, a king of Cyrene, who is said to have said.
Okay, so I think this is a way of doing it. Some people will focus on the repetition part, okay? And note, as the heathens do. So, very important, he is connecting this to the prayer of the heathens, prayer of the pagans. There's something about the way they pray that we're not to follow. And they use the word vain repetition, vain babblings, right? Meaningless, useless words. Think of it this way. We can pray, right? And I'm going to try to expand the meaning here because what we usually focus on the repetition part, right? So they will say, don't say the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. Okay, I understand that there's an element of that, but I think vain babbling or a vain repetition can apply to the idea that we're praying and we're just using meaningless words. We're not even really thinking about what we're saying. We're just babbling. You're just pray, pray, pray. Just words, 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 words. And I think sometimes that, I'll give you an example. In some churches, you have, on Wednesday nights, you'll have a little 10-minute devotional, and then everyone breaks off to prayer. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But if you've ever broken off into prayer with certain individuals, you'll have some who will, okay, here's the 3 requests, right? They'll pray. They may start with, with thanksgiving to God, maybe praise to God, maybe confess, Lord, we're unworthy. Thank you for your son. We bring these 3 requests. They'll mention the request. Amen. And then you'll have others who it's like they've been praying for 30 minutes. Now, maybe it's heartfelt and genuine, but maybe it's just praying to sound spiritual. Does that make sense? Just praying, just using words just to pray, and you're like, are you praying? And it's like, I don't know if you've ever heard some, they pull out every spiritual sounding term they can use to sound. And it's like, are you praying? Again, that goes back to, are you praying to make everyone think you're spiritual? Just, we have to consider the words we're using. I think here's the thing. If you want your prayer not to be in vain, use meaningful, make sure you're engaging in meaningful conversation with God. You're not trying to accomplish something else. You're not trying to sound super spiritual. You're not trying to sound something that you're not. Just use meaningful communication to God. Does that make sense? Meaningful communication. Avoid vain repetition, as the heathens do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. All right? Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things you have need of before you ask of Him. I think verse 8 really hits the point, doesn't it? What's the Christian perspective of prayer? God already knows what we need before we ask. Isn't that what the text says? So don't be like them. I don't have to sit there and say, I got to say it this way, I got to say it that way. Sometimes I think we think the more we say, the greater chance God will act. God knows what I need before I say it. So why do I need to just go on and on and on and on and on and on? Lord, here's my need, here's my petition, here's my intercession. Your will be done. Thank you. Amen. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have to go on and on and on and on. I just think sometimes we think if I can come up with the right way to say it, God will act. Like, I'm almost trying to persuade God. It's like when a teenager comes to the parent to try to get permission to do something, and they just keep going and going and going and going. Like, well, maybe if I say it this way, maybe if I argue this way, maybe if I ask this way, maybe I ask this way. And it's like, okay, I've already said no 10 times. I'm going to say no another 30 times. No matter how many different ways you present your argument, I've already made up my mind. Well, same way with God, all the talking is not going to change His mind. He already knows before you even ask. That is the perspective that we're supposed to have. So, let's go through these again. What's the first thing that can lead to something being vain? Giving to be seen by men, right? And what becomes vain? Our giving becomes vain as far as what is concerned? Heavenly reward. What's the second thing that can make us become vain? Our praying. And what becomes vain? Our prayer becomes vain as far as a heavenly reward is concerned. Okay? If we want our prayer not to be vain, what do we need to do? Pray in secret, pray in private. And what's another thing that can lead to a vain prayer? Vain repetition, or what? Babbling. Useless babbling. What should be the Christian perspective? God already knows before I even ask, so I don't have to spend a lot of time trying to inform Him of what's going on. I just need to state my intercession and petition, state it clearly, heartfelt. Now, if you've got something on your heart that you really want to share, that's okay, because that's not vain. It's not meaningless, useless repetition of words. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, everybody got that? So there's the first. So the first discussion, if we're going to build a theology of vanity or something that is vain, the first thing as Christians, you need to determine if your giving and your praying is vain. If your giving and your praying is vain, your service is it vain? That can determine a lot. All right, everybody got that? All right, what's the second use of the word vain? Man, that took forever to get through that. Matthew 15:9. Oh boy. All right. Now, we're going to go back to 7 because he's going to quote from the Old Testament here. All right. Now, he's in the middle of if you go back to verse 1 of Matthew chapter 15, we can get the context. Then came to Jesus whom? scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. All right, the Pharisees, the scribes and the Pharisees, they're upset with some practices that the disciples of Jesus are doing. He doesn't understand. They're questioning why they do this. They get into a big discussion here about tradition, about the commandments of God. And then look at verse 7. Jesus really goes after them. He's like, okay, you want to talk about my disciples? You want to talk about what we do? Ye hypocrites. He calls them hypocrites in verse 7. Everybody see that? Well did, he was referring to Isaiah, right? Prophesy of you, saying, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. All right? He makes a reference back to Isaiah. Yes? Anybody know where in Isaiah he's referencing? Okay, all right. Isaiah 29:13. We don't have to look it up right now. Okay. So he's making a reference back to Isaiah. And of course, in Isaiah 29:13, that would have been speaking of Israel. Yes? All right, in the context, okay? And now he's going to apply this to the scribes and the Pharisees, who were kind of the spiritual leaders of Israel. Yes? See the correlation? Okay, these are the leaders. And what does he go after the leaders for? What have they done? All right, let's draw, if you want to draw a little chart on your paper of what they have done. Step 1, they draw nigh unto me with their mouth. Okay. Well, no, we're starting in verse 8. We're not going back to that controversy. Okay, we're going to go just in verse 8, because he quotes the prophecy in 7, or he makes reference to the prophecy in 7. Yes. Okay. Then in verse 8. Now the verse before is dealing with he's comparing. They're condemning him and the disciples for what they have done. He goes after what they have done. Then he moves from that, and then he changes the subject in 7 to the prophecy. Because if we go back to verse 5 and 6, we've got to explain what's going on there. Okay? All right. Verse 8. Everybody ready? Let's draw kind of a chart of what they do. First thing they do is they draw nigh unto me with their mouth. Okay? What does that mean? They say the right things. They say the right things with their mouth. Right? They draw nigh to me with their mouth. What is the next thing? Wait. And they honoreth me with their lips. So they draw nigh, right? They say the right things, and then what do? They say all the right words of praise. Right? They say all the right words of praise. In other words, they may speak the right words, say theologically, and they can say the right words of praise. This passage is very relevant to kids raised in a Christian home, because they're good at saying all the right. They can get all the answers right on the test, right? They can say all the right words, but here's the catch. So they draw nigh with their mouth, they honor with the lips, but number 3, their heart is far from me. There is no actual heart involved in the situation. There's external, but there's no internal. All right? Now this leads to the use of the word vanity or vain. Next verse. But in vain they do worship me. All right. So we can have, are you ready? In our theology of the vain, we can have vain giving. We can have vain prayer. And then what's the third thing we can have? Vain worship. Vain worship. Now there seems to be 2 causes of vain worship here. 2 causes of vain worship. What are the 2 things that lead to vain worship? The previous verse gives you the first cause. A heartless worship. A heartless worship. In other words, you can say the right words, right? You can praise God. You can say the right doctrine. You can praise God with the right praise words. Meaningless. What has to be there? Heart. No heart, vain worship. No heart, vain worship. You can tell when people have a heart or a passion for the things of God. You can tell, as a pastor, you can tell those who have a heart and those who are just present. There's a difference between people sitting in a pew who are present and people who are sitting in the pew, and you can tell, man, there's something there. One, wasting of time, just well sit at home. The other, something's going on, right? So you're worried. So you have to determine. All right, now there's a second thing that can lead to vain worship. There's the first one, heartless. What's the next thing? It's right there in front of you. Verse 9. Teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. Okay, right? Basically, you have this. You have a heartless worship, and the second thing that leads to a vain worship is a man worship, not a God worship. What do I mean by that? You're teaching what? The commandments and ideas of men. You're not teaching the commandments and ideas of God. You're teaching the commandments of men. Now, what do we mean by teaching the commandments of men? Yeah, well, you know, in the context of the scribes and the Pharisees, what did they do to God's law? They added. Now, their motives were right, was it not? Their motives were good. Hey, well, they added because they saw the law, and they're like, okay, here's God's law. Now we've got to make sure that people don't break the law, so they added all these additional laws to try to keep people to being holy. The point is they added commandment. Christians do this all the time. Now we pick and choose how we do it. Does the Bible say love not the world? Yes. Okay. Hey, that song on the radio, that's worldly. You can't listen to it. Well, we got a command not to love the world. Now, if I listen to this music, am I violating the Scripture? That's always going to be the argument. So then someone comes along and says, here's all the things you can't listen to. Here's all the things you can't watch. Here's all the things you can't do. Now, and within Christianity, there's no agreement. I had my friend in Nebraska, no entertainment. Zero. None, period, no. Nothing. No. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, sermons, hymns, Bible study. Go to bed, wake up, go to work, come. That's it. If he came over to our house for food, if we did not have a Bible study, he was not coming over. Now that's consistent. I give him nothing, but he was consistent. Now other Christians would be like, well, we can come over and we can do this. Oh, wait, you're going to play cards? Can't do that. Cards are wrong. Independent Fundamental Baptist, right? We were taught cards were wrong, okay? Didn't know this, okay? All right, wait. Well, other things you can do. Now, you could get together and watch Nebraska football, and that was great. That was godly. But if I didn't want to watch football and I wanted to listen to music, okay. Now, you see, the desire is good because you're trying to live a godly life, but you start adding commandment. That's a problem. But I think in a general way, the bottom line is vain worship has two elements, right? Heartless. So you can have all the right doctrine, right? All the right doctrine, but it can be vain if there's no heart. However, another part of vain worship is you can have heart, but if you got the commandments of men, and you got the doctrine of men, and not the doctrine of God, guess what? It's vain. Now, please note how that works. You can be sitting here, have all the right doctrine, have all the right theology, and be vain because there's no heart. You can have a church full of people who have heart, passion, man, they make you look bad, but their doctrine is all wrong. Vain. That's hard right there. You can't, that's like, I can't win here, right? I can't win. And sometimes it's the people with the worst doctrine who have the most heart. And sometimes it's the people with the right doctrine. They died a long time ago, and they don't even realize how bad they stinketh. Okay, all right. You remember when Lazarus, Jesus, he stinketh by now? Okay, all right. There's a lot of Christians who stinketh. You're dead. You're a corpse. There's nothing, there's no heart, there's no passion, there's no zeal for the things of God. Now, you're light up when something else is mentioned, but when it comes to God, I got better things to do than talk about that. All right, that's a problem. All right, so we've got 2 passages so far, right? Now, this is where we can speed up a little bit, because the next one, I think, is it Mark 7? Is the next passage Mark 7? Yes? Okay, Mark 7. All right, go to Mark chapter 7. No one's disagreeing with me, so I'm going to assume that's the next one, okay? Mark chapter 7. Now, we can speed up here because this is going to repeat same concept, right? In fact, he's quoting the same prophecy. Look at Mark chapter 7, verse 6. Well said Isaiah, prophesied of you, hypocrites. Verse 7, howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. All right? For laying aside the commandments of God, you hold the tradition of men. There we go. All right, so we don't have to spend any extra time with that, all right? So the first one was in Matthew 6:7. The second one was in Matthew 15:9. The third one was Mark 7:7. That leads us to the next one. Acts 4:25. All right, let's go there. All right, now we know what he's going to... Does anybody know what he's referencing here? Mark 4:25, or Acts 4:25. I mean, Luke wrote it, but yeah, okay. Acts 4:25. Why? Who by the mouth of thy servant David has said, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine vain things? Okay. So is it reference to Psalm? What Psalm? Psalm 2. Everybody should know that Psalm, right? Psalm 2, okay. And if you want to go to Psalm 2. All right, Psalm 2. See what we can learn about vain. Now, it's taking us back to the Old Testament, but that's okay. It's referenced there in the New Testament in Acts 4:25. All right, here we go. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? Now, let's stop right here. All right, so what do we got so far? We can be vain in what? Our giving. We can be vain in our praying, and we can be vain in our worship. All right, that's a simple outline. We've expanded it far more than that, okay? All right, we got that down? And then what's the next thing we can be vain in? In our thinking. We can be vain in our thinking. This gives us an indication of it. And what is the definition of vain thinking here in Psalm 2? They imagine a vain thing, think a vain thing. I think it's the same concept. What do they imagine? What do they think here? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. Right? What's the vain thinking here? Okay. That man can be autonomous from God, that we can break from God, that we can have autonomy from God. In other words, I can say, I'm done with you, God, and he's going to leave me alone. Now, he may leave you alone. Well, first of all, you're still going to somehow be working within his eternal decrees and plans and his sovereignty. You can't overthrow that. And even when you break away, where are you still going to end up when it's over? Before him. So, no, whatever autonomy, there is a vain way of thinking, and the vain way of thinking is that you can somehow escape God. That you can just be done with him. You see this with kids raised in a Christian home. I'm sick of Christianity, I'm sick of mom and dad, and I'm done with it. Okay, well, congratulations. Great, great, great. Now, what you need to do is stop arguing about how you don't like Christianity and demonstrate to me how you've proven Christianity not to be real, because if it's real, you're still going to face God no matter how sick of it you are. And so any autonomy you have, you're going to have a pretend autonomy for 50 years, 40 years, 60 years. You feel like you're autonomous. You're really not, because God's still working. Yeah, you're still inside of God's universe. And then you're going to die, and then all of a sudden you're going to be, wait a minute. And what are you going to tell God? I don't care what you say to me. I have to listen to your rules. Okay, and he's going to say, depart from me. I never knew you. And then you're going to suffer his wrath. You know, even in hell you can't escape God. Because what's present in hell? His wrath. Right? You can't escape him. So that's a vain way. We can have a vain way of thinking. We can have a vain way of thinking. So let's go repeat again. We can be vain in our giving. Everybody got that? And our giving becomes vain as far as a heavenly reward when we give to be seen and to be recognized. Okay? We can be vain in our praying. How can we be vain in our praying? There's two ways we can be vain in our praying. Vain repetition. And what was the first one? Praying to be seen. And then what becomes vain? The reward. Okay, we're not going to accomplish anything, okay? Next thing that we can be vain in our worship. What leads to vain worship? Heartless worship. Man-made doctrine. Commandments of man. Not a God doctrine, but man's doctrine. Right? Can happen. And please note, that one is very convicting because you can have all the right doctrine, all the right theology, but no heart. That's vain. Or you can have all the heart in the world, but wrong doctrine. It is in vain. You know how much of the church that condemns right there? That wipes out pretty much 90% of Christianity, okay? It's hard to find people who have the right doctrine and heart. It's hard to find that mixture. It really is. I mean, you can find people, man, they got their doctrine, but they're a spiritual shell. There's just nothing, there's no substance other than they got all the right answers, but there's no heart. Does that make sense? And then you got some people, man, they got so much heart, and you almost feel bad to look at them and say, you're whacked out of your mind. You're absolutely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. You don't want to tell them that because they have so much heart, but they're still whacked, okay? So like, you gotta mix the two, all right? And then, lastly, we can be vain in our thinking, right? And our thinking, and and that's when we start thinking somehow we can be autonomous to God. What would be a good biblical example of someone who thought they could run and be autonomous from God? It's in the Old Testament, minor prophet, starts with a J. Jonah. Okay, very good, right. He thought he could do so, right? How did that work out for him? Next thing you know, he's on a boat. Next thing you know, there's a storm. Next thing you know, he's in the water. Next thing you know, he's swallowed by a big fish. Okay. Next thing you know, he's in the belly of the fish. Next thing you know, he's getting puked up on the shore. Okay. That wasn't such a good autonomy, was it? Okay? And then you have someone like Job, who he's serving God, and the next thing you know, his whole life's falling apart, and he thinks God has left him. He doesn't know where God is. And he may feel like he's been abandoned by God, that somehow he's been left in an autonomous state, but without him even knowing, the whole situation was being orchestrated by God. And you still can't escape autonomy. All right, let's pray, and then we'll get ready for the next hour. All right. Lord God, we come before you this morning. Lord, a very just simple study on one word. We will need to finish this, but a lot here to consider and think about, and I pray that we will give this some serious meditation, that our Christian life does not turn out to be a meaningless, empty, worthless life where we took the salvation that you gave to us and then wasted it and did nothing with what has been given to us. I pray that that would convict us and we would really look at our hearts and our lives. And we ask this in Jesus' name. And God's people said, amen.